Uh, I welcome everyone present here to today's talk by Professor Manush Ray. Which promises to be quite at the Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Calcutta, in 2018. He works at the interface of contemporary political theory and cultural studies. He has published on a wide spectrum of areas, including biopolitics, continental philosophy and cinema, critical legal theory, Foucault and governmentality, visual culture, diaspora and Bollywood, disaster migration, and memory and locality in post-partition Kolkata. He has held visiting fellowships and teaching positions in leading institutions of the United Kingdom, Germany, France, the Netherlands, Australia, and South Africa. His essay, Growing Up Refugee, in the History Workshop Journal, is widely regarded as a classic. Among his recent publications are two edited books on contemporary Indian democracy, published in 2021, Crisis of Liberal Deliberation, Facets of Indian Democracy, and State of Democracy in India, Essays on Life and Politics in Contemporary Times. The two books together make for the largest collection of essays on democracy to be published as yet. A very warm welcome, Manushda, and welcome all of you who are here. So Manushda, it's up to you now. We'll take it from there.
Thank you, Devdatta. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So, just keep telling me from time to time that you are hearing.
Your voice is a little faint, Manushta, if I might, before you start.
Yeah, that means I have to hold the microphone close to my mouth.
If you can.
Yeah. How is it now?
Better,
yeah.
Yeah. It's always a pleasure to come back to this podium, if we may say, of the institute where I belonged for 25 long years and hope I still belong. Those 25 years lived rather intensely. So it's a special kind of joy which I cannot express. And I thank the Professor Rosinka Chaudhary, the director of the center, and Devdatta Chaudhary for inviting me to this grand occasion. Now, the paper I'm going to present is basically a memoir, and it should be viewed like that. It's called the Unputdownable 70s Memory Matters. It's forthcoming. Actually, we hope that it will come out next month in an anthology to be published by Orient Black Swan and edited by Debjani Sengupta, celebrating the 50th anniversary of Bangladesh war and also the other happenings around that area in 1971. It's called To Bangladesh, Writings on 1971 Across Border. Now, the reason I am presenting this, that, I am already reworking on the paper and I have added a few new passages which are not there in the paper that will be published. And I'll keep on working. So I thought at this stage, if I could get some feedbacks from you. Now, the brief that Debjani gave me was I write my memoir of the early 1970s as a late teenager and in my early 20s. And when I was a college student at Presidency College, Kolkata, a memoir that brings together my memories of Naxalbari urban uprising as witnessed in city Calcutta and its surroundings, and lace it with my experiences of Bangladesh war sitting in the city, uh, whatever I could recollect. So basically, I've tried to do that. Now, as I said, that it's a memoir, and recently I was reading Salman Rushdie writing in an essay which comes in his latest anthology of essays called Languages of Truth, where he says that he hasn't read a single memoir to date which is absolutely like life. There is always a space for fiction, is something that seeps into it. And if not for other reasons, if not for conscious distortion, then at least for the very generic, alchemy, because the person you are describing in the memoir, you are creating that person in words. Okay, he or she has a different life there from the life he or she actually lives and leads. So that is there. But I think I should begin with a confession of at least one place where I know things didn't happen exactly like the way I narrate. And that is there is a blindfolding of eyes episode. I wasn't blindfolded, but everything else that I described there did happen. That is, I was brought down from a crowded bus simply because I lived in a particular locality, Netajinagar. And then I was held by the collar, taken to a specific corner, harassed, roughed up, beaten up, and for long 15 minutes I have to wait for the verdict those men will pass on whether I should continue living or whether my life should be brought to an end on the spot. So apart from that little bit there I have added, to my conscious knowledge, I haven't distorted anything. But as I said, these are two different, very different things altogether in a sense. We are dealing with characters made up of words, given life through words. So that bit one has to remember. And talking about veracity, I think I tried to remain true to the spirit of the times, if I might say so, and to the extent I have been, I regard my enterprise as successful. Now, I begin with a poem by Shakti Chattopadhyay. Those who are not acquainted with Bengali poetry, let me yeah, quickly say what that name represented to us. Shakti Chattopadhyay, along with Sunil Gangopadhyay, were the two, you know, most well-known young poets in our college days. And basically, we lived on their poetry, okay? And more as we go. So the poem is called "She Boro Shukher Shomoy Noy." But for the benefit of of those who do not read or understand Bangla, I will first give you the English translation of the poem done by, and very competently, I must say, someone called Nandini Gupta, who teaches engineering at IIT Kanpur. So there I go. My steps falter, my head swims, walls on walls, cornices on cornices. Pavements change at midnight. On my way home, houses within houses, feet within feet, heart within heart. Nothing more, so much more. But well before that, my steps falter, my head swims. Walls on walls, cornices on cornices, pavements change at midnight. On my way home, houses within houses, feet within feet, heart within heart. Nothing more. Hands up. Put up your hands till someone picks you up. Black cars within black cars, another black car inside, rows of windows, doors, graveyards, skeletons topsy turvy. White worms within bones, life within worms, death within life, hence death within death. Nothing more. Hands up, put up your hands till someone picks you up and flings you out of the car, but inside a different car, where someone always waits, like a banyan sapling clings to the plaster, someone or the other, someone you do not know, lies in wait, like a firm bird lurks behind the leaves, with traps of golden cobwebs ready to garland you. You will be waited at midnight when pavements change, steps falter, head swings. Walls on in walls, cornices in cornices. Imagine the train still, stations rushing by, stars shining beside dimming light doors. Imagine shoes walking, feet still, this, that, any poppy corn. Imagine children carrying corpse bearing palanquins to Nimtala. Nimtala is the city's burning heart. And beyond, the old lined up for a wedding dance, not a time for comfort, not a happy time this. Just then, my steps falter, my head swings, walls on walls, conscious on conscious, pavements change at midnight. On my way home, houses within houses, feet within feet, heart within heart, nothing more. পা থেকে মাথা পর্যন্ত টলমল করে দেওয়ালে দেওয়াল কার্নিশে কার্নিশ ফুটপাত বদল হয় মধ্যরাতে বাড়ি ফেরার সময় বাড়ির ভেতর বাড়ি পায়ের ভেতর পা বুকের ভেতর বুক আর কিছু নয় আরো অনেক কিছু তারও আগে মা থেকে পা থেকে মাথা পর্যন্ত টলমল করে দেওয়ালে দেওয়াল কার্নিশে কার্নিশ ফুটপাত বদল হয় মধ্যরাতে বাড়ি ফেরার সময় বাড়ির ভেতরে বাড়ি পায়ের ভেতরে পা বুকের ভেতরে বুক আর কিছু নয় হ্যান্ডস আপ হাত তুলে ধরো যতক্ষণ পর্যন্ত না কেউ তোমাকে তুলে নিয়ে যায় কালো গাড়ির ভেতরে আবার কালো গাড়ি তার ভেতরে আবার কালো গাড়ি সারবন্দি জানলা দরজা গোরস্থান ওলট পালট কঙ্কাল কঙ্কালের ভেতরে সাদা ঘুম ভেতরে জীবন জীবনের ভেতরে মৃত্যু সুতরাং মৃত্যুর ভেতরে মৃত্যু আর কিছু নয় হ্যান্ডস আপ হাত তুলে ধরো যতক্ষণ পর্যন্ত না কেউ তোমাকে তুলে নিয়ে যায় তুলে ছুঁড়ে ফেলে তুলে ছুঁড়ে ফেলে গাড়ির বাইরে কিন্তু অন্য গাড়ির ভেতর যেখানে সব সময় কেউ অপেক্ষা করে থাকে কলেজ দ্বারা মুঠো করা বটগাছ চারার মতন কেউ না কেউ যাকে তুমি চেনো না অপেক্ষা করে থাকে পাতার আড়ালে শক্ত মাকড়সার সোনালি ফাঁস সাথে মালা তোমাকে পরিয়ে দেবে তোমার বিবাহ মধ্যরাতে যখন ফুটপাত বদল হয় পা থেকে মাথা পর্যন্ত টলমল করে দেওয়ালে দেওয়াল কার্নিশে কার মনে করো গাড়ি রেখে স্টেশন দৌড়চ্ছে নিবন্ত ডুমের পাশে তারার আলো মনে করো জুতো হাঁটছে পা রয়েছে স্থির আকাশ পাতাল এতল বেতল মনে করো শিশুর কাঁধে মরার পালকি ছুটছে নিমতলা বড় পারে বুড়োদের লম্বালম্বি বাসর ভরি নাচ সে বড় সুখের সময় নয় সে বড় আনন্দের সময় নয় তখনই মাথা থেকে পা পর্যন্ত টলমল করে দেওয়ালে দেওয়াল কার্নিশে কার্নিশ ফুটপাত বদল হয় মধ্যরাতে বাড়ি ফেরার সময় বাড়ির ভেতরে বাড়ি পায়ের ভেতরে পা বুকের ভেতরে বুক আর কিছু না। As I jot down my thoughts, a discrete event comes to mind. It was not really an event, just a few utterings and happened back in 2005. I had gone to Dhaka for the first time. A friend had lent me his car to visit the locality where my parents once lived. I had heard so much about it from childhood. As we, the driver and I, meandering through the narrow lanes of Gandaria in old Dhaka, I told him soliloquy like, Do you know, had the country not been partitioned, I would have grown up here. Out came his sharp query. What? I said, partition. What is that? Baffled, I impatiently explained. He said, now that you tell me, it reminds me that my mother had also said something similar. She used to say at one point these places would be teeming with Hindus. So, why did you all leave? Exasperated, I asked him whether he had heard the story of the war, the 1971 war. For the rest of the journey, his endless narration of the stories of the war he was brought up with accompanied our ride. He was a man in his mid 30s. I realized, for the man of the street at least, the war had erased the partition, or perhaps the partition resides within the war. Nations have their own ways of dealing with memories, memories of trauma. For the newly independent India, an endeavor of silence seemed necessary for the project of the nation state. After the initial disoriented years, the partition was assigned to near oblivion in public error. From my childhood memories of early 60s, it seems to me that the Independence Day celebration referred more to the new nation than the severed nation. Of course, it would be wrong to say that the partition died out of popular memory. Communal flare ups are above all sore reminders of an unresolved past. Till, of course, they became organized, calculated pogroms of contemporary India. In recent decades, the more the national narrative of stability, growth, and statist secularism proved untenable, the more has been the interest in the partition, taking it, if not as the originary point, then at least the driving line of our national life, as it holds the secret of much of our present misery. However, this is not to say that partition became part of academic discourse only from the 1990s. Big fat tomes were being regularly churned out, probing into who was responsible, how could it have been possibly avoided, the big actors, the big story, the big picture of the big nation. The scholarship that emerged in 1990 started asking new kinds of questions, questions that came with new epistemological assignments in history writing, literary studies, and cultural anthropology. How did people undergo the experience of partition? As a group, as a family, as an individual? How did partition become part of ourselves? What does it mean to suffer? What, what is it to witness? What does it mean to be violated and raped and then have to live with those poisonous memories that cannot be shared even with very intimate relations? In short, the afterlife of pain and trauma. This scholarship paralleled, tied up, and at times drew intellectual sustenance from the emergence of a self conscious discourse of memory in history, writing, made possible by the Holocaust discourse, the emergence of cultural studies, and new trends in philosophy loosely clubbed together under the rubric of post structuralism. Over the past 3 decades, this new scholarship on the partition has grown in bulk as well as prestige, attracting some of the best writings in history, cultural studies, and cultural anthropology, as well as other branches of social and human studies. If history's project is an attempt to reduce an always already plural to sameness, the counter posture of memory is to keep this plurality alive by considering that which cannot be thought of in history. Hence the interest in marginality of history. Memory thus is framed as a counter to the unifying modes of history. Hence also the interest in oral histories of vernacular memories counter memories, all of which would capture the fragmented, interiorized experience that the normally practiced protocols of history writing misses out. While the Punjab partition produced literary and academic accounts concentrating on the violence, trauma, and living with agony, the partition literature of Bengal began mostly as an upper caste Hindu Bengali nostalgia about lost land depicted as a pastoral idyll with a lingering sense of eternity. The lush green meadows of rural East Bengal, the bucolic plenitude of food, rivers, and other waterways, the vibrant blue sky of autumn, quotidian religiosity, or with each solvent family having its family deity placed in a Thakur Dalan. Thakur Dalan is a kind of public domain, within a house, and which has pillars and at times resembling European architecture, and a raised platform where the deity would be placed. The numerous religious rituals, Brotokatha is stories from Hindu mythologies, make-believe stories, and so on. The village fairs, Dol Jatra, Rash Purnima, both festivals associated with Radha Krishna Leela and such other joyous Hindu festivals. A collective popular recollection can unobtrusively become a national recollection. The numerous memoirs, written or oral, in recent times of refugees from erstwhile East Pakistan seem to have already acquired standard generic protocols. The village of plenty, where Hindus and Muslims lived harmoniously, the sudden eruption of the partition due to the connivance of the British rulers and some misguided and opportunist leaders, the enormous hardships and bravery in the initial decades of resettlement, aiding paradoxically the formation of a new solidarity amongst refugees, and finally the gradual upward journey on the economic and social scale. Palpably biased, this story narrates only one part of Bengal's partition, that too seen from the upper caste perspective. For Bengali Muslims, the partition of 1947 was only half a victory. The other half would be enacted in East Pakistan and result in the liberation of Bangladesh from the clutches of West Pakistan in 1971. The struggle for the self esteem of Bengali Muslims could not stop merely with ceasing to be part of United India, but continued till the Urdu speaking West Pakistanis were fully ousted from the land. 1947 and 1971 are part of the same conjoint processes of the historical search for self esteem. Interestingly, the early 1970s was also the time when West Bengal witnessed an unprecedented political and social upheaval. Starting as a peasant rebellion in the foothills of the Himalayas in northern Bengal, the unrest spread like wildfire in other parts of Bengal, particularly Calcutta, where they took the shape of a full fledged urban uprising when traditions were questioned, the bourgeoisie landlord rule challenged, the continuation of colonial legacy attacked, and prevailing cultural, ethical, and sexual moves put under the scanner. The village where it started in the foothills of the Himalayas is called Naxalbari. And Naxalbari, metonymically, became the name of armed peasant uprising in India from that point onwards. And the members of that movement, at least in Bengal, are known as Nakshals. Though written from the author's own experience in Calcutta as a late teen and early 20s young man, The present article, by taking a look down the memory lane, tries to show how the streams of events in Bangladesh and West Bengal had remarkable convergence. They were not merely coeval processes, but shared larger historical truths about them. 7th May 1971. That was the day my school leaving exam was to start, had it not been indefinitely postponed due to the prevailing unrest. Towards the evening, the postman delivered a letter, a postcard, by slipping it under the door of my father's room. Father asked me to get it for him. Reading the short note, he called out for my mother. As he essayed his legs down the cot and looked for the slippers while trying to knot his lungi, Ma came in. He handed the card to her. Who is it from? Mother asked. He kept quiet for a few seconds and replied, Shrotish of Chattogram. Now, one thing has to be mentioned here that I have mostly changed the names of the character. Shrotish of Chattogram. He has come with his family and is staying as a refugee at a refugee camp, Ranaka. This was not unexpected, though not expected either. The raging war across the border had already pushed millions of evacuees to Bengal and Assam. When did they come? Apparently, more than a month now. He, with his wife and two children. He earlier wrote to his two relatives. They did not reply. Do you propose to go yourself to fetch them? Where will you find them in that mad crowd? Better to send a letter. Letter to which address? It just says Camp 7. Plus, he doesn't have a coin left. Remember, said my mother, during the 1964 riot, when they all came over, you told Satesh so many times to stay back in Calcutta and not to return. But he was too tied to their house there and his Sahib company job. The next morning, my father left early, only to return late after. Accompanying him was his boyhood friend Satish, his wife Lata, and their two children, Tomal and Lutika. My mother had seen Tomal and Lutika, but that was a good 7 years back, and Lutika was then only a small girl. In the fading sun of the late winter, my mother held Lotika's face up and remarked, whom has she taken after? She looks like Satish Babu. To which Lata Kakima was prompt to reply, Kakima means auntie, Kaka means uncle on the father's side. To which Lata Kakima was prompt to reply, you think so? People over there think she looks like you. Kakima looked quite at ease. There was hardly any trace of the travels they must have gone through in the preceding 2 months. Tamal was playful, but Lutika carried a streak of sadness that did not seem merely circumstantial, unusual for a girl of 16 or 17. Satish Kaka was distinctly sad and disoriented. The following day, Satish Kaka went out to fetch his relatives and returned with one of them. Abhinay Babu was a jovial elderly man and assured Satish Kaka to take him to a few places that might have some job openings for him. I came to know later that Satish Kaka had started his career as a stenotypist in a British firm dealing with tea export in Chattogram. Kaka rose from an ordinary clerk to the post of floor manager and was quite content with his life there. The search for new job began in earnest from the next morning itself, but it was of very little use. Finally, on the fourth day, he managed to get a stenotypist position in a Marwari concern in Park Street. They would pay him on a daily basis, 30 rupees for each day of the 5 days of the week. Saturday and Sunday being holidays, he would receive no pay. The next Monday morning, Kaka set off in a clean pair of trousers, the only decent one he had, and a blue terrain half shirt with a pen tucked in the pocket. He looked like a regular office goer. Very quickly, I thought he had managed to put his recent turbulent past behind, but luck was not on his side. He came back in the evening with a long face. Apparently, his Marwari boss told him that he would receive 30 rupees at the end of each day, all right, but rupees 150 would be deducted for every error. Since he was long out of touch with stenotyping, what he received at the end of the day was barely 10 rupees and 50 paise. I was quick to calculate the number of errors, 31. Dad expressed a strong sense of disgust. Mother said, মারোয়ারিরা কোনোদিন কারো ভালো করছে নাকি? When did the Marwaris do any good to anyone? On father's advice, Kaka didn't go back to that office again. Instead, taking some clues from father, he went to see some people at the city's office quarters, those days, Dalhousie Square, which did not work out. But Kaka got fascinated by the enormity of activities he saw there. So many thousands of people in so many organizations and occupations. He started going there every morning and checking with private firms to find out whether a vacancy existed. In the evenings, he came back sad as ever. In his absence, my parents had worried exchanges regarding his job prospect. But Kakima looked the same contented lady. Tomal spent the days climbing trees and flying kites with the local boys, an activity I thought was a bit kiddish for his age. After all, he was 3 years my older and must be by then 20. Lotika sat mostly in our wide red veranda, either looking at the sky or at her fingernails. A couple of days later, Abini Babu came to visit again. He offered Kaka some money. In course of the conversation, he suddenly hit upon an idea. Satish, wasn't came that your friend? Came that who? One who did law at Calcutta University when you were doing your BA and who stayed in the same boarding house. Don't you remember? Oh, you mean Kamini? Kamini Mohan. What about him? Are, he is now a famous lawyer and runs a law firm in Dalhousie. Why don't you meet him? Meet him tomorrow itself. My father also remembered Kamini. After all, they were all in the same boarding house in Calcutta. Satish Kaka's luck at long last smiled on him. Came Dutt and Sons was indeed a large farm, right at the heart of Dalhousie Square. Kamini apparently had remained the same good-hearted man and had indeed a place for Satish Kaka. That too, a good one. The office administrator had died a month back, and Mr. Datta was looking for a good replacement. Satish Kaka fitted the bill perfectly. He was very relieved to find a person he knew with the right kind of experience. Satish Kaka, needless to say, was relieved too. Came Dutt and Sons offered Kaka a resettlement allowance. A two-bedroom ground floor flat on the other side of the main road was rented not too far from our place. The necessary furniture was procured, including a dressing table with a long mirror at the behest of Kaki. What is this coming? I hope you can hear me all.
Yes, Manushta.
uh, Came Dutt and Sons offered Kaka a resettlement allowance. A two-bedroom ground floor flat, the other side of the main road, was rented not too far from our place. The necessary furniture was procured, including a dressing table with a long mirror at the behest of Kaki. They moved to their new place soon. It was unbelievable that the drama would be over in less than a month. When Kaka came to see us after a month with sweets, he seemed to be a different person altogether. Gone was that unsure look. He was a seasoned, alert man, settled in life. My parents were warm with in their hospitality. They talked like age-old friends, mostly in the remembrance mode of their life together in the village, and my maternal grandfather, who was the political mentor of both my father and Kaka. We began to visit them at times. Father usually went on Sunday mornings, my mother and I on the weekdays in the late afternoons. One day, Kakima asked me to get five rasagollas, a common Bengali sweet preparation, from a nearby store. It took no time for me to come back with the consignment. Kakima went to make tea. From the kitchen, she called to me and asked softly, "Did you have one of the sweets on the way?" Taken by complete surprise, I shook my head with some effort and softly said, "Nah." A few minutes earlier, I had noticed Tomal entered the house in a hurry, only to leave soon. My mother could make out that some words were exchanged in the kitchen. When she inquired about it on our way back in a rickshaw, I merely said, "I am not going back there. From now on, you come in." Shotish Kaka's days of happiness were short lived. It was clear soon that Tomal had become friendly with the local rough elements, some of them with Nakshal links. After all, their rented house was not very far away from Chanditala, a notorious Nakshal hideout. Shotish Kaka was looking for a place in another locality closer to the city. But before they could move out, one day Lutika went. On sustained enquiry, it was found out that a Bangladeshi acquaintance of her was sighted a few days back near their place. After a month or so, news reached us that Lotika and her friend Rana Muhammad Saidullah, had crossed the border and got married. Not only did Lotika marry a Muslim, but that too a liberation fighter. It took some effort for Shotish Kaka to relate the information to my parents. He looked terribly distraught. My father heaved a deep sigh and could only say, "Here, Kurba, Paina now." What else you can do other than accept it? A deep silence fell on Shotish Kaka. He remained quiet for a long time. Father only said, "ছেলেটা তো ভালো হইতে পারে. For all you know, the boy might be good." আগে তো বাইচা থাক দুজনে, আলো আর মন। এই লতার আশকারাতে কাণ্ডটা ঘটত। They'd both be alive. What's there to talk about, good or bad? It is for Lota's indulgence that this could happen at all. Shotish Kaka left at one point. It was clear that the family had known Rana quite well. Ma told my father, had Shotish listened to you and stayed back last time they came, nothing like this would have happened. They moved out to a relatively peaceful place far from our house. The visits of the two families thinned out. Tomal went to a polytechnic for a diploma course. Shotish Kaka became the right-hand man of Kaminidar. Lota Kakima was busy with matinee shows, reading film magazines, and knitting. After about uh, after 3 years, about 3 years later, one afternoon they all came to visit us. Shotish Kaka, Lota Kakima, Tomal, Lotika, and Rani. Lotika carried their little daughter, Shukla, in her arms. Rana was a tall, quiet, impressive looking man. The two touched my parents' feet and did pranam. The tip of my mother's forefingers, I think I saw, crawled back for a moment and straightened again. To touch or not to touch, when the context is a tradition of transmitting ritualistic practices from one generation to another, becomes more of an idiomotor reflex and not so much of a conscious act. My father started chatting with Rana and was happy to find that he had read his Tagore well. Rana, on his part, was pleasantly surprised to find an elderly man taking so much interest in Sheshir Kavita, Tagore's romantic meditations on the mysteries of love. Shukla in no time became the center of attraction through her cries, babble, and endless tantrums. She was a beautiful little girl of about 2. They all left after lunch, save Satish Kaka. He stayed for a long time that day. My father praised Rana and assured everything would be all right. After all, in God's universe, there were no religions, only humanity mattered. I think I noticed a hint of happiness on Satish Kaka's face. He started talking of their days together in the college boarding on Raja Dinendra Street, and with my mother, the memories of, of their village home in Dhaka and of their parents. He was not reminiscing. He was clinging to a common, blissful past to cope with the present. I remember the day the CPI-ML, Communist Party of India, Marxist-Leninist, was formed. It was in April 1969. I was then in class 9. One of the local chaps, my senior, went to attend the event. The next morning when we met, he hushed into my ear. বিপ্লব শুরু হয়ে গেছে. He seemed confident about the arrival of revolution and therefore damn excited, but also much too alert of counter-revolutionaries eavesdropping. I could not make out the reason for such caution since we were standing alone in a room. I told myself the revolution was much too serious an affair to be talked about in a normal course. I was thrilled. A whole new continent of history seemed opening before me, and also scared, much too scared. That afternoon, caught between an exilic sense of liberation and a stubborn paranoia, I witnessed something strange happen. A string of flowing sensations, a secret bodily conclave, as it were, a tumescence, all resulting in a slow imprint of a geography that would take its own shape on my pants and need to be washed out. The experience was unknown to me. I jutted my hand inside to fathom what seemed uncanny. The smell was of raw betel nut, the fragile green of the tree's pulp that had once reminded me of Madhusri's cheeks. The same experience was to recur a few months later when I was taking the maths exam. I was stuck with one problem for some time, and when the invigilator announced that only 15 more minutes were left, I had 3 more to go. I panicked. The bodily response was the same, as was the result. But this time I enjoyed welcome alchemy, though I left the paper incomplete. Soon things would fall in their proper template. I would unveil the mystery, and it then was business as usual. In the final year of school, when I was not busy giving private lessons to students, at times as old as me, I started attending the secret classes of Shadhinda, the local contact for the CPI-ML party. His dark, damp room added to the ambience of what we were taught and asked to perform. I earned a great deal of notoriety by taking part, along with fellow comrades, in an evening raid of our school premises when the nose of Gandhi's statue was broken to pieces with a sledgehammer. It took a lot of persuasion on my parents' part for the local leaders of the CPIM, Communist Party of India, Marxist, a rival then of CPIML and even now, to allow me to return to the locality again. The higher secondary exam, the school leaving exam as we call it, was never to arrive, always arriving, always postponed. At one point, I lost patience and started reading other storybooks mainly. It was not possible to remain attentive to the roller coaster of its continuous postponement. Such was the kind of distraction, at times existence threatening. Nights brought sounds of stealth footfalls, brisk runnings, and sudden distant cries and screams for help that faded slowly in the dark. If a coconut fell at odd hours, we knew someone was hiding at the top of the tree. Heavy sounds of boots meant that we closed the windows and allowed the armed policemen to go past. Finally, 3 days before the exams started, the Secretary of West Bengal Board of Secondary Examination gave a press statement asserting there would be no more postponements. I got out my books and exercise books back on the desk and tried to regain my lost concentration. It was difficult. Our exam center was a school in another refugee colony, Bapuji Nagar, near Shulekha Glass Factory. On the morning of the first exam, my mother performed the usual ritual of touching sandalwood's smeared holy flower petals on my forehead and putting the stuff inside my shirt pocket. I touched her feet as well as of my father's and set off for the exam center in a bus, escorted by my sister. Halfway through, I noticed a large crowd assembled at a playground. As the bus slowed down, I tucked my head out of the window and saw four men lying with their throats slit. One seemed to be still alive. My entry into adulthood was hasty. I, I reached the center completely disoriented. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, Manushta, we can.
Okay. In the late afternoon, as I came out of the hall into the school year, I found my sister waiting with a bag. She looked disturbed. I was told that a few hours earlier, the Central Reserve Police had cordoned off our locality and shot down five escaping men, all of whom I knew, and save one, all of whom died on the spot. I was not to return home, but was to stay at my maternal uncle's place in New Alipur. The bag apparently contained some books she thought would be useful for the rest of the exams. My mama, that is maternal uncle, was a senior manager of a rather reputed pharmaceutical company. Their airy three-bedroom flat was delightfully done up. My sister stayed back for him to return from office. After a brief chat with her, Mama called me and asked me how I proposed to go to the exam center the next morning. I had no idea. He told me not to worry, he would drop me at Gariahat Junction, though that meant making a long detour. From there, I could catch a southbound bus. I nodded my head, though it did not make matters any less confusing. My sister did not bring any exercise books of mine, where I had all my notes, including some answers written out. It did not bother me, as I had already developed a nonchalant attitude. At dinner, my uncle asked me if I still hobnobbed with my Nakshal friends and asked jokingly, I hope They will not follow you here. My auntie tried to smile to hide her anxiety. My cousin, then 5 or 6, curiously asked who were the Nokshal's. Auntie replied, জানো না তো নকশাল কি? সব খেয়ে নাও, না হলে কিন্তু নকশাল ধরে নিয়ে যাবে. You don't know what the Nakshals are. Eat up everything, otherwise the Nakshals will take you away. The little girl looked strangely at me and for the rest of my stay kept a safe distance. The morning after the first exam, the vernacular daily carried a list of 10 exam centers in Kolkata, where what was happening was not an exam but a pure farce. Our center came third in that list. The news consoled me for not having the relevant books and other study material. Exams over, I rang my father at the school where he was a headmaster and asked him to take me back the next morning. Father came, and in no time I packed my little bag and was ready to leave. Aunt made a tea for him. Mama by then had gone off to work, and soon we were off too. The next evening, Mama turned up at our place to take me back again. Since Netaji Nagar was no more safe for a young lad like me, the gesture brought us together. Gradually, I started feeling part of the family. Maima, that is maternal auntie, at times called me aloud to taste her curry still on the oven and check for salt and spices. Mama, on his way to office, dropped me near British Council, where I spent the whole day browsing. I was provided with lunch, the same that was given to my mama. I didn't know which book to look for or how to look for a title in the racks, for I had no title in mind. I used to pick up one most arbitrarily from the pile of return books and read a few pages and keep it back from where I got it. In the course of my meandering search, one day I chanced upon a book called Industry and Empire. The author's name I found was Eric Hobsbawm. Halfway through the book, as I read about the formation of industrial working class in 19th century Britain, I started dreaming of a land of distant church bells, rows of oak trees, stately building from a different era, a long tapestry of sonorous hums coming from somewhere I didn't know, of ponds and ducks and beautiful white children, young girls with small golden braids. A picture I suppose I drew in my mind from the few poems of Keats that I had read at school. The discussion on class struggle would draw my attention later, never free though of a lulling pageant of peace and harmony of a far off land. I didn't expect to do well in my school leaving exam, and I didn't do either. My marks were just about enough to secure my admission at a college run by Hindu missionaries, and just about enough to be eligible for taking the entrance test at Presidency College, Calcutta. My tenure at the missionary college far south of the city was over in a week. By then, I had received two warnings from the Maharaj, the head priest. On the first occasion, my roommate Shomitra and I were caught smuggling cigarettes tucked inside a small packet of puffed rice. The next warning was soon to come. In desperate need for transgression, Shomitra and I, one early morning, landed up in the prayer hall wrapped in bare red quilts. We were asked to wait outside the hall. The principal's call came soon after. Knowing that the final warning would not be far off, Shomitra waited for the admission test results of Jadavpur Engineering College. I, for presidency. We felt empty in the head and had nothing better to do than gazing the white ceiling more intently. One early morning, still not awake, I thought I saw my father and Didi, that is elder sister, entered the college gate and approached the hostel. I knew I must have made it to presidency. For the first time in my stay with saffron missionaries everywhere, I felt excited and happy. It didn't matter that I actually didn't see father and Bibi. It was only an apparition. I needed a thread to hang my hopes on to. Around 9 in the morning, they did land up. They were carrying the news of my admission at Presidency College, announced to me in secret excitement. We, all three of us, proceeded towards the principal's room. By then, I had already packed my luggage and put on my best apron. The principal muttered in a moaning voice, এখানে অন্তত চরিত্র গঠনটা হতো. Staying here would have at least helped in character. Leaving behind the project of character formation that the missionary college might have, have on offer, I tried hard. Give me a moment. Leaving behind. Thank you so much for those who have not left. Okay, so now let's go on. Leaving behind the project of character formation that the missionary college had on offer, I tried hard to be part of presidency crowd. The very first class was taken by Kajol Sengupta, everyone's Kajoldi. She was lucid, loud, and clear, and had a stunning appearance. Not very tall, everyone's Kajoldi. Not very tall, she was comely, her sari, white with a large red border, sat tight on her, her eyes sapphire bright, actually burning, a grey patch weaving through her hair. I felt sad, for I knew I would take no time to fall for her. One day I confided to a senior, he asked me not to be worried. This is a ritual young men perform on entry to college. You will be all right. Very early in life, I experienced the erotic spell that an attractive woman of course can create. The project of character formation had by then retreated a long way off. Presidency English honors class those days was an elite bastion. Not only did I not have English, I lacked the practice of speaking in the standard Calcutta dialect of Bangla. Brought in an unadulterated refugee colony, I could only speak in a mixed East Bengal dialect with the Dhaka variety enjoying a clear hegemony. Soon the girls of my department took me to be an introvert, and I was happy to be left alone. Presidency was my early adolescence dream. In retrospect, a magazine brought out by the radical students of the college during the fiery days of the early second part of the 1960s decided my fate. The cover contained a huge nib scribbling bold and scrubby, a nongra, pocha, gola, bourgeois সংস্কৃতি নিপাত যাক. Down with this dirty, rotten, festering bourgeois culture. Inside were articles arguing how the bourgeoisie weaves a shimmer of deception through its cultural artifacts, each piece a veritable cannonball. To date, I am yet to come across an ideology criticism so fierce, so targeted, and so committed. One such pointed target was the film Balika Bodhu, the girl bride. It disturbed my secret bonhomie with the film's early adolescent romance. Nonetheless, I took the analysis to represent a higher realm of revolutionary truth, a sacred realm, I told myself, at whose altar I must sacrifice my boyish infatuations.
I continued giving private lessons or tuition, as it was commonly called, to local lads and girls, but hiked my pay by 5 rupees. Some left, others continued. Some new ones from the adjacent Ranikuti government housing joined, who paid me more than what I expected. I gave my earnings to my mother, who in return gave me 1 rupee 50 paise every morning. By the time I returned home at night, already 10, I was half dead with exhaustion. Having spent the whole day on cups of tea at the college canteen and an occasional cup of coffee at the coffee house, courtesy Ronojoy Gupta, one of my dearest college friends. Added to my intake was the standard refreshment offered at the quote unquote tuition places, a cup of tea with 2 Marie biscuits that, by the time it was served, had lost their edges to the spilled tea on the saucer. After dinner, I lay down for a while. When I started my day's work, it was past 11:30 at night. I worked till the early hours of the morning. Next day at 8, when I was dragged out of bed by one of my sisters, I proceeded straight to the shower, head soaked in sleep that my body rightfully demanded. I took the 9:15 bus to Esplanade from Gachtola bus stop, adjacent to Netaji Nagar, where I lived. It was packed with locals and gave the feeling that the red double-decker was a moving Trojan horse, with refugee commandos who would soon invade the city center. Kamalda, sitting in the front row of the upper deck, used to sing a Bhojpuri score. Ram chale aage aage, Lakshman bhai piche. Ram walks ahead, brother Lakshman following behind, while a select few kept the tune. It was real fun. One day we were stopped at Ajadgarh by the Congress goons, among whom Kajal and Shajal, two brothers, had already acquired a great deal of notoriety. Their father, Santosh Babu, was from Dhaka, where he lived near our village. The tall man carried a huge pile of brassware on his head and inevitably, while passing by our house, stopped and had a chat with my Thakuma, that is granny, moaning in the course of exchange of nostalgic tales, those days of peace and plenty left behind. Thakuma served him a glass of water and a batasha, that is homemade kind of lolly, and offered him a pan which he chewed with great relish. Kajol and Shajol, wearing dark glasses that day, their collars turned up, commanded everyone to come down. They were looking for their enemies at Netaji Nagar. Don't be scared. We know whom we are looking for. They meant the CPIM activists. I don't know why they took me to be one amongst their chosen ones. A hard palm held me by the collar and dragged me inside Ajadgarh. I don't know whom else they chose to keep me company. Soon I would be blindfolded and made to walk a distance. At one place, I was stopped and asked to turn around. I could make out that I was not the only catch of the day, since similar orders were given to at least one more person. There was a gunshot without much fuss, a fall, and a withering cry. All happened like the trailer of a crime movie. Then someone came to me and asked, Ki korish? President Sitapuri. Banchot, Sister Faka, a motionless stillness. I imagined a white wall running behind me as I had read in the newspaper the morning after the Operation Steeplechase in Boranagar when young men were lined up next to a white wall by the Indian army and shot dead. Here, I would suggest you read Johar Sharkar's piece on that phase in The Wire. I have it in my text, but I'm not reading it out. Some whispers were eddying around me. Then a voice that said, Shon, manis na, CPM করে না, ওর বাবা আমগো হেড স্যার, ও অনিল বাবুর ছেলে, আমি অনিল বাবুর কোচিং এ পড়ছি, ওরে আমি চিনি, পার্টি টাটি করে না. Listen, don't kill him. He's not a CPIM follower. His father is our head sir. He is Anil Babu's son. I have been to Anil Babu's coaching. I know him. He's not into party politics. There was some more discussion and whispers, and then a man's footfalls approached me. The unfolding of the blindfold by rough hands, and I was set free. Someone said, Bhag Bogachoda, get lost, you fucking fool. I walked down the lane to the bus stop, my eyes and temple aching from the tight bind. Caught between fearlessness and paranoia, I thought I could not see, as if it was not necessary to see to keep walking. Years later, I read Raghav Bandyopadhyay's Nakshal memoir, Journal 70. There, the writer protagonist was similarly let off at the last moment by a firing squad of policemen on realization that he was the only son of a widow and a Brahmin, that too a Bandyopadhyay Banerjee. Killing him on a Tuesday evening would cause great sin. Since such merciful acts happen once in a blue moon, but when they do happen, they are magically real. That day, after the third class, I was approaching the college canteen. A waiter told me, your father is looking for you. I had not shared the morning episode with any of my college mates. It was too fresh, too close to me still. My father did not ask me anything. He took a taxi, and following a different route, we reached home around 4. He's silent and pensive throughout the journey. My mother too said nothing. At night, I was told that I would be taken to the college hostel next morning, where I would stay, not to come back home, even for a casual visit, unless specifically instructed. A 5 minutes walk from the college street, in the old long red building with an imposing green iron gate that closed to an arch suspiciously tight, we ate mutton for dinner every night of our lives. I discovered a new world at the hostel. Like me, the other boarders too were not from Calcutta. Many of them were from the districts. Like me, they also could not speak faultless English. Neither were they used to they could not speak faultless English, had no idea of Newmarket, did not know about Nizam's kebabs or Fleury's cakes. Neither were they used to the Italian flavors of the Firpo's restaurant. Some of them were wealthy farmers' scions and carried, on every return from home, a large bag full of puffed rice and molasses with a delicate sweet smell of coconut and date palm. They were fiercely regular about their studies and pursued their goals, or aim in life, as it was called, breathlessly. Between them and their goals, which were mostly restricted to qualifying for the state civil service cadetship, there were 2 obstructions, women and Nakshals. They joined the college fully briefed and allowed no distraction. But 1 or 2 did slip out of such vows with mostly miserable results. One late afternoon, as I returned to the hostel, I found a small crowd in the aisle leading to my room. They seemed to be enjoying the scene inside a particular room. I took a pip and realized that one of our mates had lost his sanity. Lying on the bed, he kept murmuring in a sing-song, wavering voice, "Churui paki, kutur kutur." It did not mean anything apart from suggesting that the twittering sparrows were having fun. Apparently, he was doing that for the past few hours. Windows closed, the room was dark and damp. The secret traveled from one lip to another and in no time, the entire hostel would be party to that sight. We were told that the chap, a short, thin, quiet fellow from an interior village, had fallen in love with a college girl who wore sleeveless blouses and billet scent, foreign perfume. No one questioned the inevitability of the fall. Assuredly, he came back to his senses the next morning after being administered a healthy dose of sedative. He looked forlorn, his face shrunk and dry. He was sent back home that afternoon, escorted by a fellow student. After a couple of months, the news reached us that his father had arranged a bride for him and he was going to get married and look after their land. This was the best his parents could do to rid their son of city vices. Of course, not everyone in the hostel was like this. There was another crowd, mostly from district schools or from the two sides of the Hooghly River, the industrial heartland of Bengal on the verge of rotting. They ranked very high in the school leaving exams. Save a few who joined economics, they were mostly in the hard sciences, physics and chemistry. IITs were yet to demand their pound of share, not at least on the first 50 toppers. These boys were a cheerful lot, widely read. I was introduced to Hemingway and to photography by one such boarder who chose to do as an aberration physiology. Onimesh and I went for long walks together after dinner, a path that took us at times to the city center, Esplanade, where the movie theaters mostly ran English films. Stepping inside those theaters was itself an experience. The dimly lit halls with ladies and gentlemen seated neatly and talking in soft voices, the chairs that reclined on your wish, the thick, spongy, soft carpet, mostly red, the curtain that went to the two sides in tidy folds with the ringing of the bell, the huge, spotless screen, the dim lights half tucked at the bottom of the walls on the steps, and all seemed so magical as if a somnambulist had cast a spell on the spectator. I was willing to believe everything I saw on the screen. On one such occasion, we watched Summer of 42. The heroine's long, shapely legs, her climb to the ladder, her climb up the ladder to the attic as her young lover watched in erotic shiver left a deep impression on me. It inaugurated a chemistry I was not sure I understood, a new world of fantasy I was so long not used to. Like an addict, I watched the film perhaps half a dozen times without letting anyone know. The scene of the unknown pristine West, with bells and church spires that I used to weave in the idle afternoons at British Council while reading Hobsbawm, as if reached its adulthood, its fruition. I told myself I too belonged, though I wasn't sure where or to what. Certain evenings we went out for night show in a group, giving a shout from the gate, Jivon, this many late meals. By the time we came back, it would be past midnight, and an old cat with its protégés had by then finished up 2 or 3 of the meals covered with thick brass thalis. We settled for the ones that appeared untouched. Chapatis like dried hide, and mutton as cold and taut as it could be. Occasionally, we could hear a gargle-like sound coming from the open drinking water tank. We knew what it was and what we would see. A beautiful frog of green and golden color with protruding eyes looking wistfully at the world outside and seeking our mercy. One day, 3 of us had gone to watch a James Bond film. It was the summer of 1972. Halfway through the film, as Bond was about to push a villain from a high rise, a bomb exploded at the gate of the theater. then another in the passageway to the exit. A huge commotion erupted as men and women tried to leave the auditorium all at once. We were on the third floor, the area reserved for those with the cheapest tickets. We could do little better than stand where we were and breathe the air carrying sulfurous odor. It was quite some time before we could leave the place. By then, the police had come and were busy collecting the leaflets that our marauders had left for us. One of us managed to collect a couple of them. It was roughly printed sheet of paper gone yellow. The write-up reminded us of the glorious revolution being carried out by our peasants in Debra and Gopiballabhpur. In the interior, the interior parts of Midnapur, now Jhargram. The day was not far when revolutionary peasants would surround the city of Calcutta and ask the middle class to pay for its total genuflection to the bourgeois landlord state. Suddenly, we found 3 policemen running after a thin, tall guy. They caught hold of him near the main road, started kicking straight away, and then threw him bodily inside the waiting van. We kept walking, for hiding would invite danger. We knew what awaited that chap. The van, in all possibility, would zoom into the Maidan, dark and soundless. The door would open, and the man asked to flee. As he would get out and run, he would be shot from behind, ending one more episode of urban uprising. After 10, the mutton and chapati dinner over, the whistling began from young men in wards 1 and 2. Those adjacent to the road and those, we told ourselves, were from other colleges and not by any means from Presidency. They were looking for Sonali, a tallish young beggar woman who apparently squatted outside the hostel gate at night, her newborn child on the lap, her age no more than 17 or 18, her voice husky, her complexion dusky, her unclad breasts shapely, enough to set fire to the arid lives of the undergraduates in their late teens or early 20s. Soon the gate would close and Shukeshwarji, the hostel Darwan, would start making his bed. The whistling would become intense. Young men calling out from their rooms to someone they never saw. Yet everyone was sure she was there. They wanted her to be let in as the halogen lights on the adjacent street went dim and finally off. Their whistles and fervent calling out by the name echoed down the deep hollow street. From the second floor, I tried to follow the calls and whistles as if in a place far from home. I have come to a pure land of adult despair and desire. The cries were make-believe, yet despairingly human and so real. Years later, I went back to the hostel one day and inquired with the present boarders about Sonali, the common source of inspiration in our times. It didn't amaze me that she was still being called out as she sat every night next to the hostel gate, holding her newborn baby on her lap, dusky-skinned, husky-voiced. The whistles and calls still continued and reverberated in the hollow of the night-clad street, celebrating our common totem for years. Looking back, those mirthful years at the Hindu hostel seems a long dirge to death and decay in the midst of our youth. Those ever-repeated, horribly male sex jokes like the unresponsive flesh of a paralytic limb. Sonali, however, remains the bridge over the passage of time, our timekeeper of adolescent eros. As days passed, the city Nakshals became more and more an alienated lot, more and more cornered and finished up by the lethal state apparatus. The class factor, however, remained important. Some months earlier, The vice chancellor of Jadavpur University was hacked to death by a group of students in the name of revolution to come. They belonged to influential fathers who managed to soon parcel off their sons abroad. But Nakshals from ordinary middle class, mostly refugee families, were tortured, maimed, or killed in droves. By the end of 1971, the state operation acquired some systematic formality to it. One day, while crossing the newly built Dhakuria flyover in South Calcutta, probably in late 1972, I noticed a few words scribbled in rough, hurried brush of tar on a hoarding displaying a cigarette brand. Jonagon Shurer Bacha Amra Chullam. People are a pack of swine, we bid adieu. To my mind, this remains the most truthful testimony of the state of mind of the departing Nakshals, exasperated as they were in body and soul, and utterly loathful of the betrayal of the middle class. Years later, the hoarding will be used to display the arrival of a new right-wing paper, Bortoman, that announced, Bhagwan Charar Kauke Bhoy Kore Na. Bortman fears nobody save God. Not all was over, however. More than a year later, in the wee hours of one morning, a van of armed policemen arrived at the gate of our hostel. They had a job to do and knew exactly where to go. In a room locked for ages, they discovered a whole armory of stacked arms in cupboards. It mostly consisted of choppers, knives of different shapes, and even swords. The whole collection was whisked up in another van, which soon arrived. The work was done briskly, methodically, without fuss. We could make out they were acting on the information that came from some Nakshal prisoner, that some Nakshal prisoner must have provided under torture. For some time, it was late 1973, I noticed a middle-aged man, Robinda, frequenting ward number 5 of our hostel where I stayed. Like me, most boarders of the ward were from Presidency. Robinda was a tall man with a sewing pot belly in khadi striped kurta and white pajamas. He carried a jhola, that is shoulder bag, that at times bulged out. His hair was crew-cut that allowed each strand to stand on its own, independent of others. His spectacles were small and round in a metal frame that touched the tip of the nose as he bent his head to read something. He had a disarming, carefree smile, a bit Mikoba-like. It took no time to realize that he was a man from the world of narrative who carried a large pile of anecdotes on his back. His, his repertoire was huge, right from reading horoscopes to scientific methods of circumcision to the latest in soccer strategy devised in Germany, which he preferred to call hit and run, borrowing a term, I suspect, from the Che Guevara quotes. He was mighty helpful, though his resources were nil. It took no time for me to become his chela, willing to follow him to the end, as once did the kids of Hamelin to the tune of a certain Pied Piper. I was not alone. He was particularly too keen to make friends with Prashun, the true Nakshal amongst us, though only in spirit. We, the rest of my friends, and I were merely post-Nakshals, a less glamorous breed, confused and surely ineffectual brand of revolutionaries. What saved us was our non-committal attitude. But Prashun was different. He was thoughtful and looked at the world intently from the upper part of the spectacle as he thought, curling a patch of hair all the while. A mudra dosh he liked to preserve. He was a strict moralist and loved his girlfriend, Chapa, more morally than I suspect erotically, a trait that would make him lose her to one of his dear friends, Shuvendu, a fellow Nakshal. But Proshun also read, let me mention, Kafka's Letters to Phyllis, and was passionate about the book. I soon noticed Proshun and Robinda talking quietly at times, Robinda looking this way and that as they talked. They changed the topic if we were anywhere near. It did not bother me. I admired everything that Proshun did, and Robinda was so immensely lovable. Robinda was a man full of ideas, quite often business ideas. Once he asked me, how about getting into the sari business and making some quick buck as the puja approached? The idea was to get saris from weavers in interior Bengal and sell them at a moderate price. As bonus, 3 months installment payment would be offered. But where to sell them? I asked. Ha ha, he laughed. At the gate of women's colleges. It didn't strike me that it could make for risky business to sell saris in installment to a floating crowd. Women would not surely leave their colleges to escape paying a paltry sum of money, Robinda reasoned. The operation started the very next week as planned. After our initial success, Robinda told me that we should try selling to university graduate women students who had more say in the family. So we tried our luck at Calcutta University Arts Building in the large cemented courtyard of the campus. Women flocked in droves as we explained the distinction of each sari. When the excitement was at its peak, there appeared a stern, old, thin, and gaunt-faced professor. His voice was suitably dry and devoid of any positive emotion. He chastised us. Some limits ought to be maintained. You guys have crossed all. The assembled crowd quickly thinned, but by then we had dispersed a good number of saris on the promise of payment in 3 installments. The puja vacation followed soon. After a despondent break, when we went back to the courtyard and then to the lecture theatres, a few could be traced, but many were reported to have got married in the break or simply decided not to continue their studies anymore. Our dream of making a quick buck only left us in debt. Robinda disappeared one fine morning, never to return. I used to inquire after him with Proshun, who'd put up a blank face. More than a year later, I came to know that the man we knew as Robinda was actually Altaf Latif. He was a Bangladeshi influenced by the ideas of Charu Majumdar and associated with Nakshal groups in the northern districts like Rangpur and Pabna of Bangladesh. When the newly formed Bangladesh government took a hardened stance towards the splinter groups of the Nakshals, Altaf fled to West Bengal and was living quote unquote underground. He went back in early 1974 with the idea of getting together the disjointed groups together. True to his modes, he was biting more than he could chew and was soon arrested. In the skirmish that followed, apparently he was shot dead. I did not know how much of that story was to be believed and how much discarded. Either way, it did not solve the puzzle called Robinda. Was his half-baked ideas of making a quick buck genuine, or was it an act only? Be that as it may, we both lost a sum of money, not meager, given our die-hard poverty. Many years after the volatile 1970s, in the early 1990s, I was then in Brisbane. My friend and I decided on a day's outing to the famous Byron Bay in North Queensland. We left early and in about 3 hours reached the bay. The day was spent in vain, sticking our eyes to the binocular, waiting for the whales to make their appearance. but we did catch sight of dolphins jumping in wild mirth. Halfway through the afternoon, we set back for home. We saw a village on our way back. By then, we must have been halfway through our journey. There was nothing special in seeing a village had it not been for a particular artifact that came to our notice. At the front of each house, there was a special kind of letterbox, a jerry can with a lid and a slit at the top end. We could make out this was a post-hippie village and smiled to ourselves. But what was written on the cans took the story some more distance. For each name of the houses on the cans were inscribed words like Ganga, Manali, Rishikesh, Tumbani, Chaibasha, and such others. It did not take me time to fathom that this was not only a hippie colony, but of those who had once, at one point, settled at different places of India. We couldn't help but pull up and walk around the place. Seeing us, a man past middle age came out. Patrick was his name. He told me that the best years of his life were spent in my country. Why I'm saying your country? India is also ours. It was in India that we could give up our elders' corrupting habits and outlooks, the hangovers that was passed on to us, to discover something much deeper, a mode of being close to the ways of the soul. Kindly spend the night with us. Patrick was from New South Wales, an engineer in profession. His wife, Sue, was a self-taught artist. They made black bread, drew, and were into pottery. They took their ware every Saturday to the village fair. Their children went to the village community school and spent most time outdoors in rain and sun. The bathroom had no roof, but was instead covered with foliage of a large prosperous tree. After dinner, it must have been past 10, we sat in the veranda and were chatting aimlessly and drinking green tea. At one point, Sue said dispassionately, after some time, a python will come down from the tree and stretch out on the lawn. It loves soaking in the moonlight. That night, in my sleep, I was wide awake under the stern watch of the moonlight. Decades have rolled past. I am in contact with my physiologist friend Animesh, who switched to life sciences after his BSc and now lives in California, where he heads a reputed computer lab engaged in understanding the fundamental biological basis of life. And also Proshun. He retired recently from a bank, a job he tried to run away from several times, every time to be lassoed back by his benevolent bosses. I remember spending the whole summer of 1983 at his place at Narayana in Delhi. The university was closed sine die due to student unrest. I had to complete writing my MPhil dissertation, and home was not the place to go back, not at least for an MPhil student who was merely elongating, as per family wisdom, the unemployment channel. On return from office, Proshun spent an hour or so in the kitchen preparing the meal for the night. He occasionally called me out and wanted me to watch with a binocular the third floor of an adjacent house where, I was told, his dear friend and his once girlfriend, Shuvendu and Chapa, were keeping a vigil on him. He was soon diagnosed as a schizophrenic. The unfulfilled dream of revolution had left a permanent scar on him. He still curls a patch of hair, looks askance at the world through the upper part of his glasses as he thinks. He goes to the Ramakrishna Mission library in the heart of South Calcutta every morning and stays there till late, reading Vivekananda and Aurobindo, the Gita and the Upanishad. Let me get back where I began. Sightseeing in Dhaka in my friend's car. I had heard of Shakhari Bazaar in old Dhaka from my mother. Actually, it was a kind of a refrain in her partition reminiscences. আমরা হিন্দুরা জানতাম শাঁখারি বাজার যতদিন আছে আমরা ঠিক আছি, যেদিন শাঁখারি বাজার পড়ব বুঝুম এবার যাইতে হইব. As long as Shakhari Bazaar existed, we Hindus knew we were fine. The day Shakhari Bazaar would fall, we would know the time for our departure has come. I was eager to see Shakhari Bazaar and its labyrinthine lanes. I stood at the entrance of one of those lanes and looked perhaps with eyes that had consumed many stories from ancestors. Suddenly, I noticed an old man wrapped in a white thorn with a long, neat marking of white sandalwood on his forehead, staring at me. He said nothing, but step by step came closer. When about 20 feet away, he said in a hushed voice of disapproval, "Amogo dekhoner kichu nai. বিপদে পড়ছেন বুইজা নিজের মারে চাইরা পালাইছিলেন, যদি দেখনের থাকে নিজ গরো দেখেন. There's nothing to look at us. Knowing that you were in trouble, you left your own mother and ran away. If there is anyone to look at yourself." The mortifying gaze kept looking at me. I left the place. I've come to the last bit. Does the memory of a past land, a mode of living that was once real, ever die? Doesn't it get embedded in the body tissues and become part of the many fibers? On way to the home of Chitra, my school day fancy, there used to be a narrow bamboo bridge over a small rivulet. The bridge dipped every time one passed through it, dipped and touched the water. As a result, it was permanently wet. I enjoyed crossing it. The cool sensation on my feet seemed the right finale for all the throb and squeezing of heart I felt as I crossed her house. The bamboo structure has long been replaced by a proper concrete bridge. After ages, the other day, I took that lane again and crossed the bridge. Strangely, I could feel the wet sensation in my feet once again. Blood dries, yet leaves a wet feeling behind. Charu Majumdar, whose clarion call it was for armed class struggle, was not only an icon, but the name of turbulent, restless youth in the late 60s and early 70s. His line of annihilation of class enemies and the functionaries of the state ultimately took the form of killing the ill-paid traffic constables and perhaps a score or so of large farmers and jodhas. But the rampant violence it unleashed would be exploited to the hilt by the very state apparatus it was targeting and its sponsored goons, the so-called Young Turks of the Youth Congress, making Calcutta streets and Bengal's politics bloody, a trend that still continues. No one can question the integrity of Comrade Majumdar, but in retrospect, his exuberant longing for revolution and ill-conceived ways turned the state more venomous, politics more violent, taking away the lives of many gullible young dreamers. What took roots in the city and its surroundings in the coming decades, however, was an aestheticized a revolutionary persona. In Nokshu Nokshu air, the figure disappeared, the stance remained. One that was ideal for consuming gallons of replenished tea in the college or university canteens, an advantage to, needless to say, in the area of romance. The discursive ambit of this alchemy, if that is what the word is, was being churned out in high popular Bengali poetry and fictions, Sunil Gangopadhyay being the most important of them. Regardless, for those of us who spent their late teens and early 20s in the 1970s, that wasted, crumpled, scrawny part of life now looks like a fortune coin. I can't make out through what alchemy the after college nefarious hours, those memories without ancestry, now seems to be my primary link with the spiritual flow of life. Looking back, I wonder whether the 1970s youth uprising had something more to it, a kind of a geological existence, a veritable geological explosion. Otherwise, why did it find expression in every part of the globe, albeit in different forms? In Australia, it was the time to cast asunder the long-held colonial cloak and turn to indigenous histories, to local flora and fauna. In Paris, Amsterdam, Berlin, Berkeley, and New York, it took the form of celebrating sexuality in all its splendor and also fighting for a change in gender roles, while in Africa and large parts of the colonized world, people engaged full swing in decolonizing movements. For Bangladesh, it was the time to announce independence from the Pakistani rulers and also the sovereignty of Bengali Muslim self, a process that started with the partition in 1947. In the western flank of Bengal, we dreamt of armed peasant insurgency, on the bordered philosophy of Chinese Maoism, and of fighting all the fetters that held us back from the dreams of a fuller existence, often in the name of our great 19th century achievements. We were fighting our past, right, left, and center. Action first, philosophy to follow. In retrospect, I wonder whether one common underlying theme to these various forms of protest could be the liberation of our erotic lives from the shackles of tradition, reminding ourselves never to forget that the middle of the road is the very dead end. Sunil Gangopadhyay, in a prose poem, imagines caressing the naked breast of goddess Saraswati, hugging her, kissing her, a trope that will recur at several places in his oeuvre. Poet Alok Ranjan Dasgupta, around the same time, dreamed of the goddess in the shower, naked and lonely. Later, Joy Goswami would add his bit, and so on it goes. And I must thank my two friends, Bishwajit Chatterjee and Anirban Mukherjee, for jogging up my memory. The goddess of learning, music, and poesy is also endowed with a marvelously shaped body, her face the epitome of sobriety. Together it has worked magic for Bengali, nay, Indian male imagination. Today such gestures will no doubt invite the fatwa of the Hindutva brigade, but in our times, such poems, such novels were the staple of our youth, characterizing, you may like to say, a certain kind of Bhajralok Hinduism gone valiant. Back in 2002, in my autobiographical essay, Growing Up Refugee, I had observed so often in our high school days, we had gushed out in a team, ignoring the scornful looks of the older teachers, shouting in unison slogans of gigantic simplicity. Aman Nam, Tuman Nam, Vietnam, Vietnam. My name, your name, Vietnam, Vietnam. I didn't exactly know where Vietnam was in the map. It didn't matter, for Vietnam was everywhere, a libidinal expanse, a name place where blood flowed to announce the death of a world order. Looking back, it seems that it is this libidinal expanse which brought the different uprisings of that period together, make us look for new ways of relating to the self, strive for new cartographies, sing songs, march in processions, demanding new modes of belonging, a new communion with fellow humans and nature. I'm a rag picker of the past, a collagist in the world of waste. Let me end the piece on a brighter note, or what I prefer to call life at reality's optimistic end. What I am witnessing at the present moment all around me in Kolkata is nothing short of a rejuvenation of the youth, a chorus of youth, so to say, first in the left mobilization of assembly polls, and then at the height of the pandemic, the daring door-to-door service of the Red Brigade. This cannot but lead us to a better future and will one day find an adequate replacement for the old guard. Let 100 flowers bloom in no cryptic sense. Let politics be the glass nose of the youth. Let young people sing freely in processions, not tied to some tired old scores of the past. I dream of witnessing a procession of young men and women passing by, singing Joan Baez's immortal metonymic song, "How long since I've spent a whole night in a twin bed with a stranger, his warm arms all around me." Let the 1970s come back again. Let us be talking of procurement prices for peasants and equal citizenship rights of the LGBTQ members of society in the same breath. Let revolutionaries be convinced that repression is the soul of reaction. This is particularly true in our era of neoliberal rights. Thank you so much. I don't know whether anybody is still listening to me.
Yes, thank you so much, Manojda. Yes, we still
Just
are
quite a
around.
method.
No, thank you so much. That was lovely.